Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into today's webcast with ListenFirst. My name is Zina Pagan, ARF's Marketing Manager, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin learning about understanding social signals, I will go over a few housekeeping items. The audio will be streamed. This means that you will be able to hear us throughout your computer speakers. However, if you prefer to use a teleconference option, I will post the information on the chat box for you to access via your phone. Should you have any questions during the session, please send these to me using the chat box. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. This session will be recorded. If you would like to view the recorded event, it will be available on demand within 2 weeks from today. For the best webcast experience, please keep yourself muted and your camera turned off. If you're following us on social media, please use hashtag ARF Webcast. If you're interested in hosting a webcast, please contact Daniel Bulgren at dbulgren@thearf.org or myself at zina@thearf.org. And as I mentioned previously, please keep your web cameras off. Sorry about that. The ARF does have a few events coming up. On June 1st, we have our next Webcast Wednesday with Ipsos, their review of the U.S. election. And on the very next day, June 2nd, ARF's Leadership Lab is back in session with a one-day course on neuroscience. And if you're interested to attend audience measurement, this is a reminder that our discounted rate expires this Friday, May 20th. The hotel rate also expires. So if you're interested, please make sure to book your tickets and to book your room with us this week. The conference will be held on June 12th to the 14th here in New York City. This year we have Sarah Hofstetter from 360i, Kathleen Hall from Microsoft as our keynotes, and just added this week, we also have Mark Addix, former CEO of General Mills, also keynoting. If you're interested in any one of these events or other ARF programs, please let me know and I'll be happy to direct you to the correct parties. And without further delay, I present to you ListenFirst's co-CEO and co-founder, Jason Klein. Jason, are you on? Hey, Jason, I think you're muted.
Am I here?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. I just made a great introduction that everybody missed. So thanks, Zina, and the ARF for having me here today, and thanks everybody on the phone for letting me intrude on your lunch and tell you a little bit about how we go about transforming social listening into true understanding and actionability. So before I get started, just want to give you guys a little bit of a background and the sort of point of view and perspective that I bring to this very active conversation. So, just letting everybody out there know, I am indeed a med school dropout, and that is actually me up there on the copy of the student handbook. But I didn't make it all the way and decided to switch careers and very early on became involved in the digital media landscape. So the perspective that I bring is, essentially in 2002, I founded a full-service digital advertising agency, and it was an interesting time to start working with brands and helping them figure out how to use the internet to reach consumers. We had the opportunity to work with brands like Coca-Cola and Disney and all different types of stakeholders, but at a very early stage where it was frankly the Wild West, and we got to try lots of things to reach consumers, and accountability was sort of secondary and innovation was primary. After building that company for about 8 years, we sold it to LBI, which is now part of Publicis, and I co-founded ListenFirst with my business partner from Special Ops Media, Christian Anthony, about 4 years ago. So what is it exactly that ListenFirst does, and what will I be talking a lot more about today? Essentially what we set out to do was create the essential operating system for social and digital researchers and strategists. and really help senior stakeholders understand how to harness all of the incredible insights that were theoretically coming in through data that was technically potentially already in the enterprise, or data that was living outside, and how to make sense of it. So our platform actually looks at about 15,000 different brands. We look at billions of consumer engagements every single day, and we solve lots of problems that really range the gamut, whether it's looking at the effectiveness of marketing efforts and where dollars are spent, getting a sense of what competitors are doing across all different types of categories, looking at ROI on various initiatives, how new product launches are tracking, and digging in deep on, specifically in social, what kind of content is moving the needle and what's actually driving business performance. And we do that across about a number of different verticals, and you can see in terms of the types of clients we work with, it ranges the gamut from media and entertainment to CPG to hospitality to fashion to even financial services. And you can see specifically, and there'll be a number of use cases I'll talk about in the media landscape. Within media, we do work with pretty much all of the media companies, especially in the realm of helping measure and quantify what their properties are doing in terms of digital and social. And you can see a note that AMC Networks has at the bottom here about being a primary source for how they report social metrics. So enough about that. So let's kind of dig into, and I thought it'd be helpful to look at first a little bit of like the history of social listening and what the heck is social listening, what does it mean to different stakeholders, and then ultimately we'll dive into some actual use cases for how brands, advertisers, agencies can apply social listening to drive actionable insights. So, social listening is sort of all over the place, and I think everybody, on the phone can probably relate to. It's a phrase that's used often and kind of means nothing, or a lot of things, depending on who you ask. So these are sort of the list of words that typically come up when we talk to stakeholders about what is social listening. Sentiment's usually at top of the list, positive, negative, neutral. Maybe something to do with what comes from social media platforms in terms of data, natural language processing, if you want to get fancy and talk about that. Sometimes people are talking about blog posts. Some people are just talking about social analytics. And, the truth is it's kind of all of this stuff, and it's a mixed bag of what it really is. The question that we always ask is sort of, well, why is it such a complicated question? Why isn't there just a simple answer to sort of give a sense of what is social listening? And I think a lot of that comes from when you look at the history of where and how social listening came about. So in the earliest days of when the internet came into existence, and when I started my first agency, social media didn't exist. So really, if you were trying to use technology to help brands understand consumers and behavior that was happening online, you were really left with, one thing you could really do, which was, even, and just as a reminder, this was even before Friendster existed, there were very early companies in this space, and what they were doing was mining all the conversation that existed on the internet as best they could. And it was an incredible feat to be able to look at, at that point, where insights were coming from, were, bloggers, were people writing comments on message boards. And these companies, like a Radian6 or Crimson Hexagon, invested significantly in essentially natural language processing. So the ability to harness and understand what people are saying and put it in some sort of format where marketers, brands, researchers could understand, are people saying good things, are people saying bad things, or is a lot of it neutral? And it was an incredible sea change to be able to have that data at your disposal, even if sometimes, you might get a response where somebody said something was badass, and ultimately that was categorized as a negative. So when you have companies who had been taking this approach to essentially listening online, it was easy to understand why a lot of people today still think about social listening as analogous with essentially natural language processing and sentiment analysis. But the truth is, a lot's changed. As I mentioned, social media didn't exist when many of these companies came into existence. So suddenly, when social media came into existence, there was an entire new way for people online to express their opinions about everything, and none of it had to do with words. It had to do with clicks. It had to do with likes. It had to do with shares. It had to do with follows. And when those behaviors came into the existence in the ecosystem, it changed the way any brand should be thinking about how they analyze what's coming from social platforms and what's coming generally from consumer signals on the internet. To make things even more interesting, all of the biggest platforms, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Instagrams, all invested in developing APIs. So they've now made all of this data, all of the conversation data, all of the clicking data, as we sort of simply talk about it, available in systematic ways for companies like us to analyze all this data at scale. Concurrently, something that I think everyone has seen is, whereas, for maybe the first from 2000 to 2012 or so, there was a lot more Wild West and trying stuff and seeing what works on the internet. There's certainly much more so today than ever before, a real level of accountability and how senior marketers and researchers deploy campaigns using digital and social platforms and understanding what's actually working and what's not. So with that mind frame, there's a lot more onus on the analysis of data from all of these sources and understanding what to do with it. So even in light of all of that, I think everybody on the phone knows all those things are true. When you still poll most people about social listening, they're thinking about the bad things or the good things that people say. So the mean tweets. Here's a fun one from Adam Sandler that, basically everybody still is thinking about the conversation and the negativity or the positivity coming from conversation. And that really does a disservice to what you could be doing from social signals. This is also another one that we see often, which is the famous word cloud. While these are interesting and insightful and sometimes good-looking and sometimes just make a boss happy, it's sometimes difficult to understand, okay, but what do I do with this information? So, what we really know now is to look across the broadest spectrum of signals is really what allows you to get the most insight in terms of driving real change and real actionability from the data set. And frankly, while today I'm talking mostly about social, we believe quite strongly that it's not just social signals that provide the sort of the Holy Grail to understanding consumer behavior and consumer preferences and insights. We look at all the signals, whether they're traditional sales figures to digital non-social platforms to all the social platforms. And we think that point of view really gives you the best chance to understand your consumers in a multidimensional way. No surprise here, a lot of the legacy approaches to social listening, which were focused on conversation, are not really the end-all, be-all of what social listening can be about or should be about. Here's just some, we did a little study looking at some of the metrics around conversation and what we call clicks, so all the engagements that are happening, a like or a share or a retweet. So obviously social, in 2010 was really about measuring conversation. It was a continued legacy of the ability for brands, consumers, marketers, researchers that, hey, for 10 years we've been measuring positive, negative, we've been understanding positive, negative, neutral in conversation. Let's measure that. But the truth is now, 6 years later, the conversational elements are just a small part of the story. And when we look at, even on a platform like Twitter, less than half the people on Twitter are actually tweeting. But 100% of them are following, liking, retweeting. It's the clicks. And in a very similar story we see on Facebook. And I think, it's intuitive when you think about it, which is that most people using social platforms are doing clicking. They're following, they're liking, they're retweeting, they're sharing. Many less people are actually producing content and sentences and words. So what is particularly interesting, and we pulled out a story here, which is The Walking Dead. Over the course of the first half of its 6th season, we saw 45.8 million digital engagements, and that's the whole gamut of any way that people are interacting with the program across Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, even YouTube. And we looked at how many of those engagements were resulting from clicks and how many were resulting from conversation. And we saw that 80% were actually related to the clicks on The Walking Dead's own content, so the content that AMC was actually producing for the show. So it really helps put some perspective on where are the truest sources of signals within everything that comes from social. And it's clear that both pieces, conversations and clicks, are very rich sources of intelligence. And so, just to get a sense of, so there's lots of social signals out there. It's really interesting. That's great. But I think there's a lot of talk about social, but there's not a lot of consensus about well, what do you do with it now? How can I actually apply this in what I do every day? And it's especially more difficult when many people still have the boss who sits there and scrolls through a Twitter feed and sees 2 negative things about their brand, and suddenly it's the biggest crisis for the brand to ever deal with. And we feel like that's a critical piece of perspective that has to become part of the conversation, because otherwise the reactionary approaches tend to waste time, money, and ultimately don't produce fruit. So the next few slides, I'm going to focus on a few real applications of signals that we get from social and how brands and customers and clients of ours can actually use these insights to drive things that actually change the performance of their business. So this is something that we do through analyzing social media brand affinities. And so what we do here is we can actually look at any presence of anything on, in this case we're looking at Twitter, any presence on Twitter, and we can actually analyze what all of the followers of The Walking Dead, what are the top 1,000 other things that those followers follow. So in this particular use case, this was about, well, how do we help drive the ad sales experience? And so one of the things that's interesting is there's obviously some of the things that any traditional research might uncover in terms of the expected types of behaviors and things and brands that a Walking Dead viewer might be interested in. But then you sort of look at the bottom, the longer tail of other brands that kind of come into the mix where you just would not expect to see that. And whether that's the interesting overlap between Disney and The Walking Dead, or something like Toys R Us. And for us, it provides in some ways a whole new set of a focus group to sort of see what else are people interested in and what can I do with it. So now we learn, geez, there's these 5 brands that we didn't really know how to circle of orbit around a typical Walking Dead viewer, but what do we do with it? So very actionably, this type of information we see our customers use all the time for prospecting. So for ad sales teams in the television space to be able to understand, these are new leads and these are new companies that I haven't gone after before, and I actually now have a framework and data to show that there is a reason why we should be joining forces together. And obviously on the flip side, for brand advertisers, to be able to explore the TV programs that followers of their brands are also interested in, also tends to uncover pretty interesting surprises. Other things that we do with this data, we also look at campaign effectiveness. So one of the ways that we analyze this data is to see, okay, so your affinity rating before your brand integration was at X level. After this major initiative where we did on-air spots and native social posts, what did that do to the affinity level between my brand and this TV show? And was there actually a boost? And then, as I talked about earlier, just a general understanding of your audience's interests. And we've seen other uses of this data where beyond just brands, this is the kind of information that uncovers what are other like-minded TV programs, what are other like-minded celebrities. For consumer packaged goods, we've seen customers use that to help identify influencers they may want to work with, or brand ambassadors. We've seen that identify other brands to do co-promotions and sponsorships with. So there's a number of ways very clearly and very tangibly that brands can use this type of social listening to drive actionability. Another one that we look at a lot is just generally an understanding of brand lift and advertiser ROI. So, generally brands are consistently looking for partnerships and marketing tactics to raise the profile of the brand, to drive conversion, to raise awareness. And so one of the things that's been quite interesting in this view that I'm showing you is essentially a look at, broken out by day, the number of consumer engagements happening with the brand in particular, and looking at the distribution of where those engagements are coming from, so the share by source. So in this case, we're looking at data where on the 6th and 7th, there was almost no activity happening on Facebook. And then on the 8th, this particular company did an integration on Facebook to drive awareness. And we can see the type of jump that happened on Facebook on those 2 days. And then we can also get a sense of where it returned to over time. So one, this is something that's used in retrospect to gauge how effective particular campaigns on particular social platforms were. It's also something that our customers use to create benchmarks, to understand, that lift that we saw on Facebook. Was that good? Was that bad? Was that about average? And this is the kind of data where it's even available from a competitive standpoint, so to understand what that lift looks like compared to other brands in my category. Another thing that we look at where we've seen tons of real application of the data is from a content standpoint. So one of the things that our platform does is every day we look at over 1 billion pieces of brand-owned content published across Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram. We look at YouTube as well. And we catalog all of that content, and we keep track literally of how many engagements each of those pieces of content is getting. So how many likes, how many shares, how many reblogs, and have a very simple report that just pulls up the top performing content broken out by channel over whatever time period. So what do our customers use this information for? So one, it keeps track of how often brands are posting. So the cadence of posting and how frequently and which platforms are different brands publishing their content on. Are some brands publishing the same exact content on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr at the same exact time? Or are other brands creating very specific types of content for specific platforms? More importantly, with each of those approaches, is it actually impacting the engagement? Is it actually the content that is specially produced for Instagram versus content that's repurposed? Is it getting much more engagement? And if it isn't, there's an argument for repurposing content because it's obviously expensive to develop original content for all the different platforms. The other thing that's sort of a side effect of being able to look at this data is you can also get a very good sense of when competitors are spending ad dollars behind their posts. Because when you look at a catalog of the top 20 pieces of content that Starbucks created over the past month, you may see that the top 3 posts all had hundreds of thousands of engagements, whereas number 4 had 25,000. And that gives a good sense of when, although it's never public, when spends are happening by any brand, you can certainly start to infer patterns around that as well. And I have another example of that I'll walk you through here. So this is specifically, and this is just looking at public data around Weight Watchers, but we see that in this same look, so this is looking at digital engagement broken out by platform. So the brown is Instagram, and we can see a very regular cadence. On every Tuesday, there is a surge in Instagram engagement. So we are learning that there's an initiative that Weight Watchers has around the content that they're publishing on Tuesday, so much so that they're putting spend behind it. Because if you look at the average level of engagement on any of the other content they're posting on Instagram, you can see that there's a surge that is beyond organic happening, and it's happening regularly on Tuesday. This is an important thing to be able to look at this data longitudinally, because if you look at a smaller slice of this data, like just 7 days worth of the data, for example, you may get a false positive that something happened on that Tuesday that really drove the engagement needle off the charts. But when you look at instead, a month's worth of the data, you can see that regular cadence of spending. And I think that's a particularly helpful insight for all brands, because there aren't hard and fast rules about when's the right time to spend on different social platforms and how much to spend and what to spend it on. So this gives some great insight into what the competitive landscape is doing. This is actually a look at a particular case study that we did in partnership with Facebook and ABC Family, now Freeform. And we honed in specifically to look at what happened during their promotion of 25 Days of Christmas, a big on-air, online, social media engagement that happens in December. And the hope was, how do you increase fan engagement around this promotion, which was ad-supported, particularly on Facebook and Instagram? And how do you show that the strength of this campaign in particular was a particularly attractive and engaged audience for advertisers? So, what we were able to do was look at not just the level of conversation, where we did look at the volume of the use of the hashtag 25 Days of Christmas across all of Facebook. We also looked at the engagement around all of the content during that month. And what we were able to look at and see in terms of the results was, just from year over year, there was a 25% increase in Instagram engagement. While that sounds like just a fact, it's also a merchandisable stat to an advertising partner, because it shows that there's growth and an advertiser was part of a growing initiative from the network. And to be able to look across how does ABC Family Freeform compare across all cable networks on both Facebook and Instagram over the month of December, it actually ranked #1. So it was a very compelling way to merchandise this promotion, and it's data that obviously can be leveraged in the future for selling it for the next installment this winter. And then, one other thing I wanted to point out was, as I mentioned earlier, we don't believe in social data in and of itself driving the most valuable insights. We feel like it's a part of a much larger conversation, and it's a piece of the mosaic. So in this case, we actually have a number of customers who are plugging in sales data. So in this case, it's a venue owner who has their ticket sale data piped into our platform, and they're looking at what they've created as a buzz score, which takes into account engagement signals from all the social platforms, and looking to see, on days where there was stronger buzz, does it necessarily result in more tickets sold? And I think this is a level of maturity that I think I'm really excited to start seeing across the landscape, because it's not just doing social for doing social's sake. It's doing social to learn what's actually driving business performance. And we see that as a huge trend that's evolving, and it's something that we've very actively encouraged anyone we talk to be thinking about as they look at social signals. So, I think even in light of this, and even in light of all the compelling reasons why social signals and turning them into actionability is much more than just, focusing on mean tweets. Remember, if you're just focused on that, you're looking at a small piece of the puzzle, and there's also the whole rest of the story from the other signals that exist. And so, I think Mr. Clooney can certainly get over being made fun of on Twitter when he's walking away with one of those golden statues. So with that, I'll open it up to, I wanted to leave a chunk of time to take anyone's questions and, go into depth on anything else that I kind of covered in the presentation or stuff I didn't cover.
Jason, can you hear me?
I can.
All right. Okay, so first question. Have you found other applications for your data?
Yes. So, I think when we initially sort of conceived the company, it was mostly to help at a marketing and research level. But, as we've accumulated this database of information and signals, we've done everything from, we're developing a box office tracking mechanism, taking into account all the data we have around film releases. We've actually found that our data is incredibly compelling in the financial services sector because it's a new source of consumer insights and potential leading indicators of business performance. As I sort of talked about a little bit, some of our customers are actually using our standard metrics that we've created as a currency for their ad sales conversations. We've developed measurement standards that we publish in places like Variety and Ad Age and Media Post, the Wall Street Journal. We've seen our stuff end up in investor relations press releases. And interestingly, in the media space, we've now seen the data being used for casting decisions. So deciding, who gets the role based on, the impact that they have across social.
Next question. What industries are your clients from?
So it's a mix. I know I had a bunch of media examples today because those tend to be some of the more exciting ones to look at. But, we've got clients across QSR, healthcare, pharma, fashion, CPG, financial services that I've mentioned. So it's a pretty broad range, but there's obviously there's this consistent thread across all the stakeholders, which is they're looking for how to better leverage the data that either exists in their organizations or outside their organizations, and how do they actually drive business performance, and we help them make sense of that data.
What is the value of sentiment analysis technology these days?
Okay, great question. So I know I talked a little bit about that in the earlier part of the presentation. Sentiment analysis in sort of the way that most people kind of typically think about it, which is, looking at conversation using natural language processing and getting a sense of positive, negative, and neutral. We think that it continues to play an important role, and I think there's incredible qualitative intelligence that comes out of looking at that. But, I think, one of the things that we, do see is that it's just one piece of the mosaic. It's one piece of the mosaic to understand customers, understanding a marketplace, and, it's something that is just a piece of the bigger puzzle. So it's something we actually think is a critical source of insights, and we offer it to our customers as part of our social analytics. But it's not the end-all, be-all by any means.
Next question. What are some predictions you have about how brands will approach social analytics in the future?
So that's a meaty one. I think that essentially the big thing will be, I think the data will continue to be open. So if you look at Twitter as sort of one of the earliest earliest leaders in this space in terms of how they essentially made their fire hose available. They made all of their data systematically available for brands or, frankly, for anybody to analyze, make sense of, productize, do whatever they want to do with it. And one of the things that that's led to has been a better understanding of when you do campaigns or initiatives with Twitter, what is it actually doing? How is it moving the needle? And Facebook has a very robust API, multiple APIs with lots of really interesting insights that come from it. Tumblr has their fire hose, and I think the piece around having that API and making that data available is I think it's a lot about transparency, but mostly it's about brand advertisers, because essentially all these platforms make their money with advertisers. And, there's only going to be so long of a honeymoon period where brands are going to be okay taking a flyer and saying, yeah, I'll pay $1 million to be the first whatever on, the first type of social story on this particular platform, because over time it's going to become harder and harder to justify that spend unless you have the data behind it. So, Snapchat's something that comes to mind all the time when I get asked this question. And, Snapchat here is, right now is every advertiser's darling. It's the millennial platform of choice. Everybody wants to be there. But interestingly enough, the data from Snapchat has been kept very close to the vest. And it's not surprising at all. I think that's how all platforms started in sharing their data. It's shared with just a limited amount of partners or advertisers at first. But, at some point when Snapchat decides that they want to open up their platform to drive more advertising relationships and partnerships, there'll be some form of API to help drive, whether it's better ad targeting or whether it's, frankly, just to give better proof of performance. I do think the other piece that's going to be very interesting is how brands and media companies actually use the social platforms as publishing solutions. And you see this trend of Facebook even allowing media companies to publish their content and sell ads against it and do a revenue share in a very transparent way. So I think there's a lot of interesting things happening, but definitely I'd say the biggest one is about making that data available to analyze and to help advertisers understand the impact of the campaigns on these platforms. That's a huge piece of what will be happening.
Next question. How do you know what metrics matter?
So I wish there was like a simple answer for that. And, our platform literally looks at about 1,000 plus distinct metrics, maybe more, every single day across the tens of thousands of brands that we analyze. And it's a real mixed bag. I think in that question, I think part of understanding is what does mattering mean? Does mattering mean just, getting more engagement? Does it mean actually driving sales conversions? But I think, depending on different business KPIs that are out there, there's certainly different social metrics that do act as proxies for measures of success. One of the interesting ones that we look at, which isn't even social, is Wikipedia. So we actually look at page views of Wikipedia pages every hour, every day for every Wikipedia page, and we look at that as almost like a proxy for organic search. And in many industries, the Wikipedia movement and data can be more insightful than anything we're looking at from social. We obviously look at, some types of content. A share truly is worth more than a favorite or a comment. But it's not a uniform it's not a uniform answer for that. So what typically happens most often for how we look at metrics and the metrics that matter is they're driven by looking at it on a customer-by-customer basis. To do things like regression analyses against a business performance indicator and a year's worth of data across every single platform. We've collected the data to understand at different points in the year where there were different sales impact or brand reputation changes. What were the things that happened on social and digital platforms that actually were happening around the same time or precipitating some of these big changes in business performance? So those are. I know it's not a simple, clean answer where it's like shares on Facebook matter the most, but it is really it's a complicated question, and there's not a single answer for sure.
Next question. I saw in Synopsis that your company has partnered with AMC Networks to launch a new digital analytics tool, Affinities Engine. Would you be able to share a bit about it, or was it already covered earlier when you spoke about Affinities?
Yeah, so that was a bit of that example, but I can talk a little bit more about how it works and what how we're seeing employed. So that example with The Walking Dead is, and I'll just kind of thumb back here so you can see it as I talk about it. That this particular analysis was about a brand affinity, but generally and more generically, what it is that we're doing and what we're looking at is we're essentially looking at any handle we want. In this case on Twitter, but the idea is to glean insights about the brand in general by understanding what are the other things that the followers of that brand also follow. And one of the things that is particularly complicated about the analysis when it's done in a really straightforward way is like everybody follows Justin Bieber somehow. Everybody follows the President of the United States. Everybody follows some major celebrities. So if you're just looking at just the 1,000 other things that everyone who follows, you're going to see the same handles and the same types of brands or the same types of people show up on the top all the time. So what we actually did was we did a layer of intelligence on top of that to develop an algorithm that kind of filters out the noise and highlights the unique returns that actually are very special and related to the particular title that you're looking at. So it's this Walking Dead example is much more about sales prospecting, but we had one of the big talent agencies wanted us to look up the talent that they represent to understand what philanthropical pursuits should that talent get more involved in. We've had brands who've used it to look to see is there a particular brand ambassador or someone who we should be thinking about, or should we be doing a co-promotion with this other brand because 50% of the people who are following us are also following this other brand or this other person or this other cause. So it's a really interesting tool, and the Affinities Engine can really be used in a million different ways. So we're sort of the partnership with AMC was a great thing to kind of do some proof of concept together and make sure it's applicable and drives business in the real world. But I think we're super excited about all the ways that the people, our clients and people who come to us think about also using it.
Okay, it looks like we have 2 more questions, just in case anyone else is planning to submit one. Here's your last chance. On the affinity question, is this just analyzing followers on Twitter or other platforms as well?
So in this particular example, it's starting with Twitter, but it's something we're rolling out to other platforms as well. And it kind of speaks to, some of the, what I talked about in terms of data availability. Different platforms create data available in different ways at different times, and so this particular one from Twitter is available, and we definitely plan to adapt it and use it across all platforms as broadly as we can.
Last question. You said that there are a lot of different inputs that go into your rankings and scoring. How do you weigh page views versus social conversation versus other inputs?
Good question. So we have, and I didn't talk too much about this earlier, but we take this whole sort of sandbox of data that we've been collecting, and we know that looking at it granularly is good for some use cases, but for other use cases, it's just too much stuff. So we found that there was a real need across our client base in different industries to create some simple, standardized measurements that could be referenced in an apples-to-apples way across different categories. So in one case, so one of the earliest metrics we put out was our digital audience ratings for television. We also put out another one which was for brand engagement ratings, where we look at engagement of the 500 biggest advertising spending. And we published that on Media Post, and we published the audience rating with Variety. And for those, because they were sort of first to market, we felt pretty strongly about a couple of things, that we wanted to be very completely transparent about what goes into the ratings in terms of each individual data point and what gets factored into it. And we felt that we didn't want to weight anything, which sounds a little bit odd because, you know, even that question is getting at it too, which is like, how can you really say that a page view and a share and a like are all worth the same? And, you know, being totally candid, I don't think they are. But what I do know is that there is not clear and convincing evidence or research that does show that analyzes every single one of the data points we put into there and how much more valuable they are or they aren't. So we took a totally opposite approach, which is let's not weight this. Let's be transparent about this. This alone is so new and so sort of disruptive to how people talk about this stuff that we don't want to add another layer of a black box that nobody really understands what's happening under the hood. So that was a big driver of it. But we do have a number of new metrics that are going to have levels of weighting that are a product of more regression analysis against business KPIs. But you know, we just felt very strongly that to start, you got to take baby steps. And you know, for these metrics, these were the first metrics that were ever put out in the landscape that were cross-platform for various industries, and they were looking at both conversation as well as engagement. And we felt that those were really interesting high-level signals that would help people see when is something aberrant happening and then sort of dig into, well, wait, what was the thing happening? Was it a bunch of page views on Wikipedia or was it a bunch of likes on Facebook? And that level of granularity we also have available. It's just something that is able to be peeled back from the onion once you know that it's a transparent way to measure this stuff.
All right. I think that we've reached the end of our question submission. Jason, is there anything else that you'd like to mention before we sign off?
No, I mean, I think I tried to distill this down to just a handful of ways that we see, you know, social listening really get put into action. But you know, I think there are all sorts of very interesting ways, and every day, you know, what's been quite fascinating is the data sources that we have available to us today are actually different and more expanded than what we had even a year ago. So it's been pretty exciting to sort of be in partnership with a lot of different companies with really interesting use cases to figure out new ways to apply it. So we're always open to any other thoughts or any other recommendations or suggestions, especially, you know, from partner organizations at the ARF, because it's something where we spend a lot of time doing work for our clients, but we're also really excited to do some innovative R&D and always looking for partners outside of our ecosystem to do that with. So feel free to always be in touch with us. And, you know, if any questions come up that you didn't want to talk about through a webinar, you know, my email is on that last page, and you can feel free to reach out to us with any further questions. So thanks again for everyone's time. Really appreciate it, and hope this was helpful and insightful for everybody.
Jason, thank you for taking the time to present with us at the ARF on our Webcast Wednesday program. And everybody that joined us, thank you for spending either your lunch hour or after lunch hour, for those on the West Coast, your morning with the ARF and ListenFirst. Hope to see you guys again. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.